Imagine waking up each morning, unsure if you will survive the day. Imagine streets filled with the smoke of car bombs and entire villages wiped out overnight. Imagine a government so weakened by corruption and debt that it can no longer offer its citizens basic protection. This was Peru in the 1980s, a nation trapped in a death storm between a crumbling economy and the violent revolution of the Shining Path. It was a nation desperate for order, desperate for change, and desperate for a leader who could stop the terror. Against this backdrop of fear and failure, an unlikely savior rose, a university professor named Alberto Fujimori. His rise, his controversial self-coup, and his ultimate downfall would reshape Peru and spark one of the most controversial chapters in Latin American history. This is the story of revolution, reaction, and reform, and the heavy price a nation pays when security is placed above democracy. Alberto Fujimori's self-coup marked a turning point in Peru's history. Although his acquired power helped dismantle the Shining Path's terroristic operations and restore stability, it also weakened democratic institutions and established a dangerous precedent for trading civil liberties for security.
Peru's crisis began long before Fujimori ever appeared on the political stage. Built upon the economic crisis of the 1980s, the country suffered one of the worst collapses in modern history, with inflation soaring to nearly 7,500% by 1990.
Is that Peru had dramatic hyperinflation and the economy was really in a tailspin.
At the same time, weak governments and widespread corruption destroyed the trust of the public. Peru's leadership shifted constantly. Policies failed, and institutions seemed unable to ever return to normalcy. As trust in the government vanished, two radical revolutionary groups seized power: the Shining Path and the Tupac Amaru Revolutionary Movement, also known as the MRTA. Led by Abimael Guzman, the Shining Path launched a violent Maoist revolution aimed at overthrowing the Peruvian state entirely.
There was a sort of scorched earth strategy that also had very negative consequences. If you were in a rural area, thousands and thousands of peasants were killed or disappeared.
They targeted anyone they deemed an enemy of the people, including teachers and community leaders. By the end of the decade, tens of thousands of Peruvians had been killed.
The Shining Path basically considered any kind of community organizing or other left-wing activity as anti-revolutionary.
The country was waiting for someone to react, desperately hiding under a thin blanket of protection.
By 1990, Peruvians were finished with traditional politicians. In a stunning vote, they elected a complete political outsider, Alberto Fujimori. A son of Japanese immigrants and an agricultural engineer, he was nicknamed El Chino. He campaigned on a simple promise: work, technology, and honesty, vowing to rescue the economy and end the terror. Once in office, Fujimori's first major reform was a brutal eye-widener known as the Fuji Shock. It worked, and the economy stabilized, but the immediate cost was devastating. Overnight, the price of bread rose by 1,500%. For the nation's poor, the cure felt almost as painful as the disease. But the economic crisis was only half the battle. Fujimori felt handcuffed by a slow-moving Congress and a judiciary he claimed were infiltrated by corruption and sympathizers of the rebellion. He argued that democracy, in its current form, was a luxury Peru could no longer afford while the Shining Path was at the gates of the capital. On the night of April 5th, 1992, the reaction became explosive. In a televised address, Fujimori announced the auto-golpe, or a self-coup. He claimed these extraordinary measures were the only way to defeat terrorism and dismantle corruption. To a terrified public, it was seen as a necessary move. Polls at the time showed nearly 80% of the population supported the coup.
With the checks and balances of democracy removed, Fujimori's reaction grew increasingly iron-fisted. He declared a permanent state of emergency, effectively turning the country over to military control.
And then once he took office, he very quickly reversed course on a lot of his policies and implemented a draconian economic package that had a horrible impact on a lot of people economically.
Here, military judges sat behind mirrored glass, their identities hidden to protect them from retaliation. But security came at the cost of justice. Defendants were held in secret detentions, denied lawyers, and sentenced to life in prison with almost no due process. Fujimori's intelligence services, led by his shadowy advisor Vladimiro Montesinos, unleashed special units like Grupo Colina.
There's so many cases of human rights atrocities.
They used torture, kidnappings, and disappearances to silence anyone suspected of sympathy for the rebels. Tragedies like the Barrios Altos massacre, where 15 people, including an 8-year-old child, were gunned down, showed the world that the government's tactics had become as brutal as the terrorists they were fighting. Ironically, the greatest victory of the war didn't come from a death squad or a massacre. On September 12, 1992, a specialized police intelligence unit known as the GEIN captured Abimael Guzman.
They created a police team that carried out a very long investigation where they figured out where he was being held or where he was staying. And they, were going through the garbage and finding the cigarette butts of the cigarettes that he smoked.
For many, it justified Fujimori's authoritarianism. He delivered the security he promised, but the broader campaign had left a deep scar on the nation. In the process of saving the state, Fujimori had dismantled the very democratic values that were supposed to define it.
There was definitely huge opposition and concern about what this meant for democracy in Peru.
In the wake of Guzman's capture, the change in Peru was immediate and visible. The constant fear of car bombs and blackouts began to fade. For the first time in a decade, daily life in Lima felt safe. But this peace came with a heavy military presence. Fujimori seized this moment of high popularity to cement his power through a series of sweeping reforms. In 1993, he pushed through a new constitution. This wasn't just a legal update, it was a fundamental shift that expanded federal powers and, for the first time, allowed for immediate re-election. While the revolution was dying, the reaction was being implemented. The anti-state terror laws that were supposed to be temporary became permanent tools of the state. Mass detentions continued, and the lack of due process meant that many innocent people, often from poor, rural, or indigenous communities, were swept up in raids and disappeared into the prison system. As his power grew, the space for dissent shrank. Press freedom was strangled. The government used bribes and intimidation to ensure that TV stations and newspapers praised the presidency and ignored the growing reports of human rights abuses. Fear was no longer coming from the Shining Path, it was coming from the government. In the highlands and shantytowns, families began to speak out. They told stories of midnight raids and loved ones who never returned. From this grief, a new movement for justice began to organize. These activists became the first crack in the facade of Fujimori's order. Alberto Fujimori became the enemy he swore to defeat.
By the mid-1990s, Fujimori seemed invincible. He had crushed the Shining Path and ended hyperinflation. By 1995, he was re-elected in a landslide. But as his power consolidated, the dark side of his reforms seemed impossible to ignore. It wasn't just the death squads. The state that promised to protect its citizens was now violating their most basic bodily autonomy.
Women weren't being told that they were being sterilized, or they were, they had some kind of complication and they were told that they had to be sterilized.
The end came from not a revolution, but from a leaked VHS tape. In September 2000, a video surfaced showing Fujimori's top advisor, Vladimiro Montesinos, bribing an opposition politician. It was the first of thousands of Vlad videos that exposed a massive web of corruption involving judges, media owners, and the military. In 2007, Fujimori was extradited to Peru. In a landmark 2009 trial, he became the first democratically elected head of state in the world to be convicted of human rights abuses in his own country. He was sentenced to 25 years in prisons for crimes against humanity. Alberto Fujimori passed away in September 2024, but his shadow still looms over Peru. Peru's journey proves that the price of security is often paid in democracy. In the struggle between order and liberty, the reforms of today can become the tragedies of tomorrow.